Good afternoon. My name is Gregory Sumas. I'm a Manhattan Democratic Commissioner and the President of the Board of Elections for 2014. The commissioners beginning to my left will state their presence for the record.
Michael Andino, Bronx County Republican.
Simon Schmidt, Kings Republican.
Ron Castorina, Richmond County Republican. Good afternoon, everyone.
Michael Michelle, Queens Republican.
Julie Deb, Brooklyn Democrat. Welcome, everyone.
Marie Costello, Richmond Democrat.
Executive staff, could state their presence for the record, please.
Michael Ryan, Executive Director.
Joan Stanzel, Deputy Executive Director.
Camila Perkins, Administrative Manager.
Staff, please.
Valerie Vasquez, Director of Communications.
Nina M. Crispino, Director of Personnel.
Kenneth Malton, Council for Commissioners.
Stephen Dankberg, Council.
Steve Richmond, General Counsel. Raphael Sino, Deputy General Counsel.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any items to add to the agenda? I know the agenda has been distributed. Mr. Ryan, you said you want the executive session for personnel?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll add executive session for personnel. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for February 25th. Has everybody had the opportunity to take a look at them?
I will move them, Mr. President.
I'll second it. All in favor? Anybody opposed or again? Abstain? Okay, motion carries. Number 2, Michael Ryan.
Yes, attached to the Commissioner's agenda is a copy of the testimony that was prepared for the New York City Council Joint Committee hearing on governmental operations and oversight and investigations that was conducted on Friday, February 28, 2014. I believe that the testimony that was prepared was comprehensive and addresses all of the concerns that were raised in the Department of Investigation report of December 30th, 2013. In addition to providing that to the joint committees, an advance copy was also delivered to the Department of Investigation prior to the actual hearing. I believe that the testimony speaks for itself, and the commissioners have received a copy of it ahead of time. If any of the commissioners have any questions with respect to the testimony, I will certainly be happy to answer it. Any questions that any commissioners may have.
No questions. Anybody from the public have a question? No? Moving right along. Next
Actually,
item.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead, Mr. Hammond.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Rachel Foss. I work for Citizens Union. We were also at the hearing on Friday. And we just wanted to follow up and ask whether the commissioners considered, as part of some of the issues that came up during the hearing, doing open posting of employment positions with the Board of Elections through the NYC.gov website.
Thank you. Anybody want to address that? I haven't considered it, so next. Mr. Ryan?
I'm sorry, what was that question?
The question was, have the commissioners considered posting vacant positions on the NYC.gov website? And I said I hadn't considered it, nobody else spoke up. So I assume that nobody wants to discuss it.
And just as a
And
matter of...
Mr. Ryan is not afraid to speak.
As a matter of clarification, the hearing was only conducted on Friday. I certainly did not want to speak in advance of the commissioners since the inquiry is directed to the commissioners, but the hearing was only held on Friday. I did not get back to the office until after 5 o'clock, and this is our first public hearing after the hearing. So I will be discussing all of the concerns raised by the various council members at the committee hearing, and certainly I would suspect that once the commissioners have had time to deliberate over those concerns, that there will be a more formal and more public statement with respect to any of those issues.
Thank you.
I'll certainly consider it. I believe in transparency, and upon consideration of all the factors, I think that might be a fine idea to in fact put that on the website, and we can screen candidates accordingly with resumes and see that they're fit for service for the Board of Elections. I think it might be a fine idea.
Well, keep in mind, you can do that right away on your own.
Absolutely, we do.
I would also clarify that we do have a weekly vacancy report, bi-weekly vacancy report, I'm sorry. It used to be weekly, it's bi-weekly vacancy report, which is included on the website as it's updated and on the agenda as well. Letter B is a notice that we received from the New York City Council regarding March 25th, 2014, 11:15 a.m. Budget hearing. And I'm requesting the Commissioner's authority to attend and also to prepare testimony in relation to that hearing as well.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Anybody opposed or abstained? Motion carries unanimously.
C, update on webcasting. As those of you can see, we have equipment for the first time at one of our hearings that will allow for the recording of our meetings in a digital video format. There was a law that was passed, signed into law by former Mayor Bloomberg on December 2nd, 2013, which was effective yesterday, requiring that we webcast our meetings live where practicable, and if not practicable, that we post to our link on our website or the city's website within 72 hours after the meeting. To ensure the openness of our meetings and compliance with the law, as a quote-unquote stopgap measure, we have purchased video recording equipment which will be posted to a YouTube account after this meeting. I would certainly expect within 24 hours after this meeting, so that anyone who wants to go back and see what we did, they can review it. We are in the process, as I'm learning, there are various services that can be procured for the purposes of not only recording our meetings, but appropriately archiving and indexing those meetings as well. We have one proposal that said it would take about 60 days for implementation once the procurement has been made. And since we do now and have, according to New York State election law, not voluntarily, complied with the PPB rules, we will be making a procurement in accordance with the PPB rules. Now, I know that there's been some speculation that we don't comply with the PPB rules. That speculation would, in fact, be wrong, and if folks would simply read the election law, they would know that we comply with the PPB rules because we're required to. So we'll be doing that in accordance with the PPB rules, and we will have at some point down the road an appropriate system for archiving and indexing our minutes. In the meantime, we're happy to announce that I would imagine, since the law only went into effect yesterday, we are likely the first, and certainly one of the first agencies to be in compliance with the new law. That concludes letter C. Moving on.
Hang on one second.
Sure.
You have a question?
It's not a question that, again, this is Rachel Foss from Citizens Union. We wanted to thank the board for the steps it's taking to comply with the webcasting law. It is very commendable that you are, and I believe you may be one of the first this week to be putting your video online. I know this is something that we've talked with you before in the past few years, and we're just pleased that you're complying and wanted to commend you for that. And we're available to help as you look at potential options. We've vetted different proposals before for testimony we've provided to the City Council. So we are familiar with many of the streaming services and happy to provide any assistance to you.
Thank you very much. And we recognize, the Department of Information Telecommunications and Technology indicated that we should do a YouTube in the interim. One of the frailties with that, and one of the things that we don't like about it, which underscores the reason to get a vendor and be more in control of that, you're not in control of the advertisements that are attached to that on YouTube. So if an advertisement should be attached, we will be monitoring that and lodge any complaints with YouTube. But certainly, we don't want to be ultimately criticized if there is an advertisement that is otherwise inappropriate. We're doing what we need to do to comply with the law, recognizing that it's not the perfect solution. It just gets us one step closer to full compliance, which would be implementation of the system. So, and that having been said, if anybody is aware of any inappropriate content on YouTube attached to our postings, we would welcome immediate notification so that we could lodge the appropriate complaint, recognizing that we're not in full control of the information once it gets out into the stream of commerce on the internet.
Commissioner Dent?
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to ask you, Executive Director Ryan, is there any way that we could put that information that you just shared on our website, indicating that, our own personal website, indicating that we have no control over the advertisement that may be attached to?
Absolutely, and I will direct MIS to do so. Quite frankly, that is not something that I thought of, so I thank you, Commissioner Dent, for bringing that to my attention, and we'll certainly make sure that we put the appropriate disclaimer on the website. Moving on to D. Last week, the Commissioners directed that we formulate a plan with respect to bringing the agency into compliance with New York State election law and the regulations promulgated by the State Board of Elections with respect to the archiving of voter cards more than 2 years old. One of the things I think that can be frustrating as the Executive Director of the Board of Elections is that observers from the outside who don't work here every day and don't necessarily understand all the things that go into running a Board of Elections often make assumptions that just by fiat or by some stroke of a magic wand or some sprinkling of fairy dust that things can just be fixed automatically, and they oversimplify the manner in which things can be fixed. And that's a disservice, quite frankly, to the citizens and the voters of the City of New York. This is a complex process. This is an agency that is a hybrid between an executive agency and a legislative body, in that it takes a vote of 6 commissioners to accomplish things, and the statutory scheme, both the constitutional and state law as interpreting the Constitution, do not necessarily lend to easy fixes. So, as a demonstration of how complex these things can be, right here is a pile of papers that contain all of the voter registration records in the borough of Queens alone that were filed with the Board of Elections from January 7, 2007 to December 31st, 2011. That represents 5 years' worth of records. Each one of these pieces of paper contains 80 voter records. These are all the buff cards that we would have to get rid of just in the borough of Queens, totaling 253,040 just for a 5-year period from January 1st, 2007 to December 31st, 2011. That is a monumental undertaking if that was all we had to do. So we have roughly 5 million voter registration cards that will have to be purged as we move forward. So what's going to happen is we are going to print up a list for each of the boroughs. Each borough files these cards a little bit differently than the others, so I'll be working closely with each borough to meet the needs of each individual borough. We're going to be printing up lists and giving tasks assigned to each borough to have them remove the voter registration cards pursuant to a list, rather than just leave it to the individual borough's ability to do it. So we'll work with them, we'll establish a list, and at the end of the process, what we're going to be left with. And the reason that I picked December 31st, 2011 as the cutoff date is, if we're able to get rid of all these cards, we were able to get rid of all these cards immediately, which obviously it's going to be a large process. What we would be left with at the start of a year is all of the voter cards for 2012 and all of the voter cards for 2013. So they will be listed alphabetically. They will be listed alphabetically in each, they will be filed alphabetically by year. So we'll have 2012, 2013, we'll collect all the new cards for 2014, so that when we get to 2015, we will simply be able to dispose of 2012. But we have a tremendous amount of work moving backwards to get rid of all of the cards that are presently in existence. But the longest journey starts with a single step, and we are taking that step today, and from this point forward, I will work closely with the individual counties to make sure that we, at the executive level, meet the needs of the county and give them whatever assistance they need to make sure that this process is completed not only accurately, but in a bipartisan manner. The other thing that we have...
Before you want the other thing, when we were here
Right.
last week, no motion was taken by the commissioners, but it was, in my perception, a nearly unanimous belief on the part of the commissioners that this needed to be done. I think, though, at this point, the motion is necessary to change our practices, and I move that we direct Mr. Ryan to implement his plan to do away with the buff cards for a period of time in excess of the statutory requirement.
I second that motion.
Everybody seconds it? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous.
And there is a caveat, though once everything's finalized and I've communicated with all of the boroughs, we must submit what we're going to do, what our intentions are, to the State Board of Elections, because the State Board of Elections has to give the final say as to their approval as well.
You want me to take Queens with me?
You can take Queens with you on the way home. Carry it on the train, it'll be,
I would just add that in speaking to my manager in Brooklyn, it seems to be in Brooklyn, and I'm sure in other boroughs, archived records that span years going back before the turn of the 19th century. And to the extent that they hold historical value, or,
Absolutely.
you know, there should be exceptions to every rule here. Obviously, we don't want to just, you know, make sure things are digitized and then dump them in the shredder. The city has a long, great history, so to the extent we can help preserve some of that with original official records, we should try to do so.
well, I appreciate you bringing that up, Commissioner Shimon. That was actually going to be the next statement that I was going to make, which is, I think that you're absolutely correct. There will be, I don't say a vast majority, and I don't necessarily think that just because something is old, that it's necessarily of historical value automatically, but I'm sure that there are voter cards for certain historic figures that are essential to the history of the city of New York. And one of the things that I was going to do, in addition to that, was reach out to Doris, the Division of Record and Information Services, to discuss with them, you know, appropriate archiving perhaps at the Doris level for some of these more historic documents. And they're really professional archivists, because quite frankly, to the extent that we have historical documents, we are not keeping them in a climate-controlled environment to make sure that they're properly preserved. As a matter of fact, at least in one of our borough offices, there is some issue with paper mites and people getting rashes when they go into the files to get cards out. So we're keeping them the way you keep stuff in an office. That's not, you know, professionally archiving these records, but certainly if, for example, if we have Mayor LaGuardia's registration card, that would be something that, you know, historians and the public would be interested in seeing and perhaps being put on display. So certainly we would be reaching out to Doris to see what the appropriate thing to do with those documents would be.
Mr. Director, I would just also add that perhaps we should reach out to local historical societies, because those folks could work on the archival of this data without a cost perhaps to the taxpayers through the Board of Elections. So perhaps that might be another way which provides cost savings to the city.
Right. And then as we identify those records, we'd certainly come back to the commissioners and say, you know, hey, these are the records that we've identified, and we'd like to turn them over either to Doris or to the Brooklyn Historical Society or something else, and see how the commissioners react to that at that point. But all of those points are very well taken. That's all I have to say with respect to the voter registration forms. With respect to, there was a Wall Street Journal article this morning, or yesterday, I'm sorry, regarding the city council making it one of their agenda items to abolish the runoff elections, and apparently they've taken a little bit of a different tactic. That's why I put it on the agenda. They're pursuing working with the state legislature, and what that would do is, if the state legislature passes an instant runoff bill, that would obviate the necessity of having the instant runoff proposition be put on the ballot. If the city council passes legislation, it would have to go before the voters of the city of New York in order to become law at some point. If the state does it, then that's not required. So that would be a more streamlined way for it to happen. I will remind the commissioners, and the reason I put this on the agenda was to remind the commissioners that we did testify before an assembly committee with respect to this matter, and the assembly has given us, the board, I should say, its assurances that we will work closely together to make sure that any implementation issues that arise over the course of time would be worked out well in advance of a start date of this. Pardon?
Commissioners, last week the Assembly passed a demonstration bill to allow any local government in the state to experiment with an instant runoff voting in 2014, 15, and 16 to give them some information and a local option. It was sent to the Senate last week. We're waiting to see the Senate version of that bill, but that doesn't address our ultimate problem when there's the next mandated runoff election. This would be allowing experimentation for any city, town, village, or school board to opt in and create an instant runoff system over the next 3 years to test it out.
And the last agenda item F, was for informational purposes. I put it on the agenda so that the public would be well aware. The New York State Board of Elections, hot off the presses, March 4th, 2014, forwarded to us the certification of offices to be filled at the November 4th, 2014 general election. This document speaks for itself, and it is attached to the agenda, but to make sure that the public is adequately informed as quickly as we possibly can, I attached it to the agenda, and now it's out. I don't know if any commissioners have anything else that they wish to add.
I have an item. It seems that there had been some discussion among commissioners and certainly in the press and the DOI reports and generally amongst people that are involved in the political process and the election process with this debate about voter cards and whether they continue to serve their purpose or whether they're still required. I think much the same as we did with voter registration forms, without a motion really, but perhaps to be prepared to have a substantive discussion next week about voter cards and their usefulness and their future.
Well, I have something substantive to say right now, so I'll call on myself to say it. There was not much in the DOI report that I agreed with, but I think that the one thing that it did was to highlight the fact that under New York state law, there really are no checks at the poll site. We don't have voter ID cards, and that's a national debate that I'm not going to get involved in right now. But anybody can walk into a poll site and say, I'm Simon Shamoon, I want to vote. The only check is those voter ID cards. As little as it may be, that's all we have. And I'll say that I was prepared a few months ago to do away with them, and Commissioner Humane actually convinced me that that is in fact the only ballot security measure that we have in the city of New York. Now, I think that as a substantive matter, I'm not prepared to do away with the only security measure that we have at all.
I'm just curious, how does it stop?
Because it forces you to come in and sign your name, and it's all, as little as it is, it's all there is. Because DOI proved that anybody can walk in off the street, assume the identity of anybody else, and vote.
Well, you can still come in and sign your name in the book. So what is the value of these cards at this juncture when you can come in off the street, say, my name is Brett Sumas, and I want to vote, and I can sign my name in the book?
It's
The
all,
cards had
it's a good debate, and it's a good argument for voter ID cards.
It may be, but we're not talking about that
That's
right
all
now.
we have.
But I haven't been provided with a rationale as to the utility in 2014. I understand and I understood the utility when we had the old machines for primaries, but I don't understand the utility for the present day, and I still haven't been provided with a reasonable explanation. So at some point, I think we should continue. I think Commissioner Shimoon is correct. We should continue discussing this on a substantive level. I think we have been, and I think we will continue to do so. And at some point, it should come up for a vote for the commissioners. And at this point, I don't think that we really should be discussing the substantive points until we have an opportunity to flesh that out.
I've been here much longer than you. So the reason I point that out is because I've lost many a vote. I'm not gonna get upset if I lose this one either. As long as I have the opportunity to state my position on the record. If I lose, over the course of the last 9 years, I've lost a lot. And that's okay. I'm not upset, and I certainly don't hold it against you if that's what you believe. I'm sorry, but, so I don't mind, but it's all we have. Do I think that there should be changes to the law? Yes. Am I a legislator? No. So it is what it is. And I just think it's as little as it is, it's all we have.
As far as I know, and I don't want to speak for Commissioner Remain, he's not here, but one of the things that he always stressed was that it was the stopgap to get to the scan. Now, that is actually more about poll workers and training them and all of that. So I think the voter card is not being used as it originally was intended. It's now being used as a stopgap to get to it. And I believe personally that the staff should try to come up with a better way of doing it so we can evaluate it and then see if that can be eliminated and have another modern way of stopping people from getting to the site.
Absolutely. And
so that's why,
not to mention the cost savings involved in the storage and the production, the same way we were just talking about the voter registration cards. So there's a lot of opportunity for cost savings, and I think we should continue the substantive debate, and eventually we should bring it up for a vote. As a matter of fact, I just want to point out, I did bring that up at, I believe, our second meeting this year, that we should continue that substantive discussion. I'm glad that we're doing it.
It was your first.
I just want to add, we've started this discussion in 2000, actually during the presidential, and we're still discussing it. And it's never going to come to a vote unless we take it to a vote.
I agree.
Well, vote.
I make a motion to get rid of the voter cards.
I think
There's a motion on the floor. I'm the executive director.
Well, has anybody,
I'd like to find out what I know they have been working on a stopgap to replace the card.
I think
So
part
does
of
anybody second the motion?
Do they have an explanation?
Well,
Can they do that right now, and I'll second it? Can they answer the question, Julie?
Mr. Ryan?
Yes, I believe that there are several ways that we can go about it. And taking a step back, it's part of a larger issue. The larger issue as well is voter privacy. So one of the other criticisms that's been intertwined into this argument is the fact that we do not provide sufficient voter privacy, which has several layers to it. One of the layers is, and every issue is interrelated to every other issue. So again, I want to underscore that to the outside observers, to the people that aren't professional election administrators, you can't raise one issue in a vacuum without it raising something else, right? So we have a situation where the ballots seem to be getting longer and longer, and we're reaching a saturation point where they're not going to be able to get any longer. When the machines were first put into effect, the DS200s, there was no quote-unquote privacy sleeve. Eventually, a privacy sleeve was put into effect. That was essentially a manila folder, and it was a quick way to resolve a problem, and in some respects the most cost-efficient way, because essentially all you did was take a manila folder that was otherwise available at Staples and put the ballots into this privacy sleeve. Because of the length of the ballots are now sticking out at the top or the bottom, or at both the top and the bottom of these privacy sleeves, and voters are becoming concerned that their ballots are partially at least visible as they're walking throughout the polling places. So we have looked into several different potential solutions. And essentially, these are three prototypes of potential privacy sleeves that could be used if the voter cards are eliminated. One of them, all of the instructions, there's various different options that we could ultimately bring before the commissioners to vote on if we come to consensus that we're going to get rid of the voter cards. The one that includes the instructions, however, again, solves another problem. We have to set up the privacy booths every election with all of the instructions. In the transport of the thousands and thousands of pieces of equipment that we put out each election, often those instructions are removed, they get lost, they're loose, and we have to do this setup process over and over again. If we come up with a privacy sleeve that also includes the instructions, that will eliminate, on a rough estimate, please don't anybody hold me to this, but in a very rough estimate, 1,500 man-hours of work that we did a preliminary estimate if we're able to eliminate the necessity of having the privacy booths set up with all the instructions every single election cycle. So we'll have an offset in the savings of the printing with respect to the voter cards. That will be offset, of course, by the printing of the new privacy sleeves, which will have a cost associated with it, which we have not fully evaluated. But I believe that they'll be roughly equivalent. We should be able to do it within the money that's set forth on the side for the voter cards. But then we're also going to save setup time on the front end of the process. So that's going to come with it a quote-unquote savings of man-hours and make the agency more efficient. Now, one of the concerns is that when people go up to the scanner, that they could just take a ballot indiscriminately and get to the scanner. Well, certainly, if they are now carrying one of these options, and we certainly could make it a more brightly colored, I mean, you know, there's different things that we could do. This was just done for demonstrative purposes. If we can get them to the DS200 with a big folder like this, that's going to eliminate a lot, if not all, of the concerns about access to the DS200s. And I also, you know, in the 3 election cycles that I've, well, 1 cycle, but 3 elections that, since I've been executive director, I go to the polling sites as well. And I find that, you know, the voter cards do contribute to a slowing down of the process. Conservatively and in a very, very generous way to the proponents of keeping the voter cards, it's at least 30 seconds to fill out the voter card. In the rush hours, in the earlier mornings and in the latter part of the evenings, when there's a lot of people there, 30 seconds, you know, times 100 voters could turn out to be a lot of time over the course of time. I've also found that people often drop them, they put them into the privacy sleeve, they're on the floor, now they have to go back to wherever they thought they filled out their ballot and try to find their voter card, which is now on the floor. With respect to the actual security issue, to save money and to get the job done, we printed voter cards off of a standard 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that was divided in 4. Theoretically, those could be reproduced, and it wouldn't necessarily provide you with the level of security that folks think. I do agree with Commissioner Sumas that there is a larger issue with respect to access to the poll books and folks signing in. But all of that, despite the criticism that we have recently received, is a matter of legislation. And the state legislature has made a value judgment that people should have relatively free and relatively unfettered and relatively uninterfered with access to the poll books. And we are not encouraged to be the police of people who can actually vote. And that's statutory structure. That's not, you know, a value judgment that we've made. We simply follow the law in that regard. So I think that with the details of something like this to be as yet worked out, I'm confident, at least as far as my recommendation goes, that the implementation of an enhanced privacy sleeve, which comes with it all the other operational concerns that we have, I would be confident to recommend to this Board of Commissioners today, or at any other time in the future that I'm so asked, that this board can confidently move forward to vote to eliminate the use of the voter cards, and for the executive management to come back with a detailed plan as to what that means moving forward after we, again, discuss this matter with all the boroughs, and we'll come back, in other words, give us the mandate to come back with the plan and say, yes, we're voting to eliminate the voter cards, and we're charging you, Mr. Ryan, and the remainder of executive staff to come back with a plan as to exactly how that's going to be done. And I believe, well, I'm not the president, sorry.
You didn't need a motion on that for the both cards, or would you need a
Would
motion?
anybody in the public like to make a comment?
Thanks very much, I would. My name is Kate Dora, and I'm with the League of Women Voters, and I'm also a poll site worker, a coordinator, and I'm very happy to hear this discussion finally in a public way, really public way, I guess. I'm sensitive to what you're saying, Commissioner Humane, about Sumas, I beg your pardon. I'm speaking, you were
Commissioner
speaking.
Humane.
To err is humane, he said, right? I'm sensitive to both the Manhattan Commissioner's concerns, but I don't see, I heard you say it's all we got, but it doesn't function in any way, shape, or form as a protection against voter fraud. The voter, his or herself, doesn't write anything on it. It's filled out by a harried and often hurried poll worker. They're worried, the poll workers are worried about the difference between a stub number and a voter number. So it keeps them from doing the really important job of a poll worker, and that would prevent voter fraud, which is to look at the signature. Compare the signature of that person standing in front of you to what's in the poll book, and then eyeball that person and see, is this the person, does that person look that age? Were they born in 1925? They're not doing that. I can promise you that is not the way poll workers are trained, and that's not a hard thing to train. In a simulated environment, in a training class, that would be an easy thing to train, and it would be fun. You'd engage the students in something like that. Some role play as a poll worker, and others role play a voter. And you have them do the actual job of examining a signature and looking at the date of birth. And you could make a little, like a cheat sheet. Somebody born in 1920 is going to be 94 years old, right? Someone born in 1993 last year was going to be 20 years old. And so you can just, it would be fast.
At 8 o'clock on election night, the only role playing is victim and assailant.
Perhaps, but what I'm saying
Nothing
is,
is fun at 8 o'clock on election
I won't stand in front of you any longer, but I just wanted to challenge your contention that it does anything to prevent voter fraud, because it does not. The poll workers at the scanners just often forget to take them.
Well, let me reverse the roles for a moment, since you're
Sure.
in the role playing. What would you do in my position? There's absolutely nothing in the statute that allows for any type of ballot security. And DOI report made it clear.
I don't understand what you mean by ballot security.
There's nothing to prevent you from walking to a poll site and pretending to be Mike Ryan and voting in his stead.
Well, first of all,
what would you do if you were me?
I mean, first of all, the poll worker should say, hey, this person, it says here your name is Michael, you don't look like Michael to me. You don't look like the Michael.
Pollers can't do legal.
They can say,
You've been commissioner for 18 seconds, you've already broken the law. The next minute and a half doesn't bode well for you.
no, I'm saying after they've examined the signature, they
Okay.
say, this doesn't look like your signature.
Yeah.
This doesn't look like your
Broke the
signature.
law twice.
It's not our job to challenge the voter's signature. I think that's what we're supposed to do, to say, this signature doesn't look like the one in the poll book, sir.
You can challenge, it's a challenge of.
Right, and then the voter can say, it is my signature, I've been sick, I just broke my
And then
arm.
he votes on the challenger.
Right, there are
They
cases,
vote on the machine anyway, but it is noted that it is
it's
challenged.
noted as a challenge.
So what happens when the vote's counted on the machine?
I don't understand the question, what do you mean?
Well, it's a somewhat, when the vote is counted on the machine, the vote is counted on the machine.
Okay, but then how would a voter card prevent that?
Excuse me, I asked you a question, and you can't come back with a question.
Fair enough. You'd get a vote counted, I suppose. But the voter card is not going to prevent that situation.
But I made you commissioner. I waved my magic wand, you're the commissioner, what would you do? I'm sitting here struggling with what to do.
You mean about the voter cards?
About any type of ballot security whatsoever. What am I supposed to do?
You.
DOI did a report that
Okay.
says two things happened. First of all, a bunch of people walking off the street pretending to be somebody they weren't, and they voted. And then they said people had to wait in line for too long. I submitted people who weren't authorized to vote hadn't gone in to vote. The line would have been shorter, but that's really not the answer to the question. What do you do? What would you do if you were me, other than sit there and ask a lot of questions?
I'm very glad you asked that because I have a prepared answer.
Good.
I would work.
Because you may give me my answer. I'm looking for help.
I would work really hard to survey your district leaders about how they recruit poll workers and start recruiting people who have the skills necessary to do the job, and then train them in the actual work that they need to do at the poll site. That's what I would do.
So your policy and procedure change would be to recruit better people?
Recruit better people and train them in the job that they have to do, specifically simulating the job they have to do, and emphasize ballot security and the fact that we don't have any voter ID laws in New York State, so that your job is to look at that signature. Sometimes there's no signature at all, and poll workers think that that's...
That would slow the process down at all if our $200 per day poll workers became handwriting experts overnight?
I sit in the poll workers' spot.
Excuse me, that was
I don't
a
think
very
so,
direct
no.
question.
No, it would not, because they wouldn't have other things to do. They wouldn't be filling out voter cards so that they could focus on this important job.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
And PS 321 in Brooklyn should be a model, right?
Yes.
No, she
It's-
doesn't always obey
I'm-
the rules, as we have found out.
When it's been
He
brought,
came to visit you, you didn't open up all your scanners.
but that was many years ago, and as soon as I was, as soon as I was reprimanded, I did what I was told, yes.
As a add-on to that, and we're looking at other things as well. For example, you had said, could we have a list and a cutoff date? One of the things that we're looking at, and it's going to, Steve Ferguson is here, we've had this, he's from MIS, we've had this conversation with him, and we also have to, our contract is nearing expiration with respect to the poll books. So one of the things that we're looking at as we move forward with a new contract for the poll books is adding a field of the person's age next to the date of birth, so that it's more intuitive.
It wouldn't have to be
it's right there.
intuitive,
It's not
it'd be right
intuitive.
there.
It's less intuitive and more direct.
Right.
Number one, and number two, the other piece which will come with an added cost is reconfiguring the way poll list books are made and tabbing them, so that the letter A will end with an A, and then have a tab for the letter B, so that it will make it hopefully easier to navigate the poll books.
Terrific idea.
On election day. But those are things that we're looking at doing, but obviously, in the context of the new procurement process, we're going to be looking at, new vendors and see what solutions that they can come up with to help us do business better than we've done it in the past. And, in contrary to what has become an erroneous public opinion, we don't simply sit on our hands waiting for other people to come up with glorious suggestions about how we should do our business. We're constantly working to make sure that we're looking to run the railroad a little bit better tomorrow than we did today. So we're working on these things, and we're trying very hard, so I want everyone to understand that.
I would just like to say thank you to you for coming up and sharing those concerns and suggestions with us. Thank you.
So to recap, Commissioner Guastella made a motion, and then there was some discussion. Would anybody like to second the motion, or would you like to continue discussion next week?
This time we withdraw motion.
Thank you, Commissioner. That seems to be the end of the agenda, and we are now moving on to executive session for personnel.
We're going to have a discussion on it next week with a full presentation.
Yes.
Is that what you were looking for, Mr. Ryan, from us without a motion, as we did with the buff cards?
I can do
With
that.
props?
Would you like him to do that?
I would love for him
I-
to. With
I-
props.
I-
With props.
I would love it.
But just as a matter of clarification, that wasn't what I was looking for. What I was looking for was a vote to direct me to do it and move forward with a plan at a later date, but
Since
certainly...
it's not golf season, you have plenty of time.
The purpose of my bringing it up in the first place was that because we operate like a board, as a board, that things like this that have implications and are really serious matters should be discussed in the public forum. It wasn't my, it wasn't a tactic of mine to kind of force that discussion today, but I think that's the way we should operate. Let's, give a heads up next week, substantive discussion, and if we take a vote next week, great. And if it passes or fails, we've come this far. Another week's not going to come. But especially if it's done the right way, as a board should, with the public on notice now, and maybe more people will show up and state their case. So I'm torn on the subject, which is why I think a substantive debate is very important. I think the public, as was kind of alluded to by Mr. Ryan earlier, might oversimplify what we do, but the voter knows that, their exposure with us is about 10 minutes, 2 or 3 times a year, if that. And so they feel that the machines get wheeled out, I vote, I go home, and the Board of Election turns off the lights until the next election. And so anything we can do to better the process in that 10 or 15 minute period, everything else should be a given. It should run like a well-oiled machine. But our focus has to be on the voter walking into that school or that polling site, voting quickly and efficiently, and going home and having the confidence that they voted the right way. So anything we can do, we should discuss.
Well, I'm from the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which is, I believe, unique to the rest of the city. And in 2008, I had a conversation with a voter who I know to be somebody who would wait in line hours for dinner, and wait in line hours for the movie, but didn't want to wait in line to vote for the leader of the free world, which I find to be fascinating. While people should vote quickly and not wait in line, and voting should be as easy as possible, while we are not lords of the manor, we serve the people, we should have a substantive discussion to lay on the table our cards, what we believe as experts in the field, what we think are the pluses and minuses of any policy and procedure. I may be completely wet when it comes to ballot security. I don't think that those cards are in fact ballot security. I just think that that's all that there is. I certainly welcome this substantive discussion, and if the Democrats in New York County tell me that they all disagree with me, then I'll change my vote, because I'm here to represent them, not to rule over them. But to further your point, I certainly welcome any invitation for a substantive conversation.
I would like one thing. When your props come with a different borough, you're always picking on Queens.
I wasn't picking on Queens. I was focusing on Queens as one of the side jewels in the ring of the city. Because we know that Staten Island is in fact the jewel of the city. Queens is probably as closely related to Staten Island as any other borough.
When I reach this point, I know it's time to move on. I move that we go to executive session for personnel. Anybody second it? Commissioner Castrini.
Yes, I just wanted to commend Commissioner Guastella for having the courage to make that motion. I do think that by doing so, she's kind of stirred us all to the point where we are going to have this open and substantive debate. I'd like to hear from each of the commissioners and their individual positions next week, and I think we should do that in an open and public way. And I just commend Commissioner Guastella for her courage.
And could I just say one more thing?
No.
One more.
No.
One.
Commissioner. Motion was made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any objector, abstaining, good. Executive session. If anybody's not here, we come back next Tuesday at 1:30, which is right after 1:29. Taken in executive session. I will entertain a motion to adjourn to next Tuesday at 1:30 p.m.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor? Terrific. We're adjourned to next Tuesday at 1:30.